Chapter 8, Moses. The three conditions which Jesus gives us for discipleship are fundamental, and surprisingly, they do not originate in the New Testament. Principles for godly living and the processes for holiness do not change throughout the whole Bible. In the following examples from the Old and New Testaments, we will see that before God can trust and use a man for his purposes, there always has to be a progression through the three stages. Self-denial, dealing with the world. Taking up the cross, dealing with the flesh. And following Jesus, dealing with the devil. Leaving Egypt. Moses was reared in Egypt, a great cultural empire, and educated as Pharaoh's son. If Egypt typifies the world, as most Bible scholars agree, Moses was becoming great and successful in the world. He was brought up in all the eloquence and pride of this great nation. Under provocation, Moses did what was natural for his Adamic nature to do. He saw one of his fellow Hebrews being mistreated and murdered the Egyptian oppressor and freed a man under bondage. This was not a permanent solution, of course, for doubtless another taskmaster just as cruel would replace the dead man. It was only a temporary alleviation, but God had a greater purpose. He used these circumstances, for Moses had to flee for his life. Destiny. I'm sure that anyone whom God intends to use has a sense of destiny. And I believe that Moses felt deep down that someday he would deliver God's people. However, he did not realize that you cannot deliver people from the world when you are still in it yourself. Thomas à Kempis, in his book The Imitation of Christ, said, "You cannot take anyone further than you are willing to go yourself." So Moses had to leave the world. Having left Egypt, Moses now began the second stage of his training and spiritual progress. He went into the wilderness for 40 years and looked after sheep, an occupation that was an abomination to an Egyptian. It was not enough for him to leave Egypt, the world. He now had to have his inner life crushed, the pride of Egypt in his soul. All of its culture and thinking had to be destroyed in his life. Moses' call. When God called him, Moses claimed that he was not eloquent, a man of stammering lips. Was this a speech impediment from birth? The Bible does not say so. Was it a lack of faith or fear of Pharaoh? I do not believe so. I believe Moses has now come to a true assessment of himself. He had been trained in the protocol of Egypt and was well qualified to do the job. After all, he had been brought up in Pharaoh's palace. After 40 years in the wilderness, Moses now had a true assessment of himself. He had no confidence in self. This was a healthy situation, for now he could only have confidence in God. John Wesley's definition of humility was having a true assessment of yourself. This makes you weak in self, but strong in God. The wilderness had accomplished this process in Moses. Talking to sheep for 40 years had robbed him of his confidence in the flesh, all the eloquence and pride that was natural to Egypt's culture. After this, God's assessment was that Moses was the meekest man on earth. I think it is worth 40 years of trials to have an accolade like that from God. God was now ready to use Moses, because Moses was now ready to be used by God. Now he was ready for the third stage, which is a natural consequence of the first two. Following Jesus, destroying the works of the devil. When Moses was in the world, Egypt, his efforts delivered one slave and destroyed one Egyptian. Now, freed from the world and crucified in his flesh, he was sent back into the world, Egypt. There he was used by God to deliver a whole nation and destroy the whole Egyptian army in one operation. Absolutely amazing. Deliverance. Would it not be worth 40 years of testing if afterwards we could free our country from the iron bands that grip it? Undoubtedly. Our materialistic society balks at this because we have become used to quick or even instant results. We live in a society where the ethos is get the goods or the blessings now and pay later. This is contrary to God's way. All creation preaches the principles of God. Death comes before resurrection. Night comes before day. The cross before the crown. Why does modern Christianity use methods and looks for results that contradict these principles? Moses is a wonderful example of an intercessor. He changed God's mind on more than one occasion. Read in Exodus 32 how he saved a whole nation from God's wrath by his intercession. Christians have grown into a way of thinking that if they attend a few seminars, spend a day at an intercession celebration, shout at the devil and tell him he is already defeated, then they are intercessors. How is it possible for them to be so deluded? What was the secret of Moses' intercession? It is extremely simple. Moses had become a man who God would listen to and speak with face to face. Christians can be so busy seeking God's hand of provision that they never seek his face. But God will listen to a man who has freed himself from the world and had his character moulded in the furnace of affliction. All intercessors have this in common. Abraham was the friend of God. Daniel was a man greatly beloved of God. Praying Moses' or Daniel's prayers will not make us intercessors. God does not listen to our prayers alone. He also listens to our heart. If they do not say the same thing, we would be better to not pray at all. 'Tis not enough to bend the knee and words of prayer to say. The heart must with the mind agree, or else we do not pray.